Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. There's an article that appeared in today's Mirror with regard to a politician who is concerned that there's going to be a crash between a UFO and a plane or other human-made aircraft anytime now. Anyway, this article is, the headline states, "Air crash with plane and UFO is only a matter of time," claims politician. A senior politician has claimed that a collision between a plane and a UFO is only a matter of time and added that we need to step up our work on extraterrestrials. U.S. Congressman Tim Burchett recently spoke out about UFOs, now known as UAP, and urged people to be wary. He said that although defense chiefs and United States Space Agency NASA have launched probes into potential alien craft, Tim believes that not enough is being done and an accident could be imminent, as the Daily Star reports. He's now called on the United States government to make public all the records it holds on UFO sightings and pilots who claim to have had close encounters to be called to give evidence to Congress. I just want to stop there for a minute. I think that's really good. I think that's a good thing. It's nice to see somebody in Congress. It's nice to see some Congress members finally taking the lead on this, and and trying to get information out to the public that's being withheld for decades now. It's really refreshing. Anyway, let's continue here a little bit. It says, Tim, former mayor of Knox County, Tennessee, expressed frustration that defense chiefs have so far only been able to find an explanation for one of 144 reported sightings since 2004. He claimed the search for the truth is being hampered by a lack of transparency, quote, which isn't just unfair to the public, but it could put the safety of our pilots in jeopardy, end quote. He said, plenty of military pilots have reported UAP encounters that have no logical explanation. Some of them have warned it was only a matter of time before an aircraft got into a mid-air collision with an unexplained object. Yet, despite these warnings and reports, the first standardized reporting structure wasn't established until 2019. Our government has been surprisingly quiet about the topic for many decades, despite the many reports. Okay, I'm just going to stop here. Okay, yeah, of course they've been quiet about about this for many decades. They've denied it. There was anything to it. I mean, that's everybody knows this. I mean, they've been especially people in the UFO community know this for a fact. There's been a government cover up for decades, since at least 1947 that we know of. But I just want to the one thing I'm going to say here is. I don't know, in my mind, I mean, there really aren't. I mean, a lot of crashes. I mean, over 75 years now that we know that these things have been, I mean, it's during that course of time where it seems that these things are more prevalent here on Earth. Now, of course, there's been reports long before that, for the centuries leading up to 1947, but we really didn't start flying until the 20th century. So, there really hasn't been a lot of reports of planes crashing into UFOs. Now, of course, there have been, reports of flying saucer crashes, and that's different. Now, in early July 1947, the night before Mac Brazel found all this strange debris on his ranch, there was a severe lightning storm. Now, apparently, sometimes I would assume, right, a tremendous lightning strike, a tremendous lightning bolt, could cause tremendous damage to one of these crafts. I mean, some things, you just can't account for, no matter how advanced you are. So Mother Nature sometimes is going to have the final say in some of these things. So I mean, also a lot of people in the UFO community believe that what happened in Roswell was caused initially by a bolt of lightning, and who knows? Something caused something to crash. I mean, there's hundreds of witnesses compared to no witnesses to a fallen weather balloon that the Air Force contends, but there were hundreds of witnesses, first and secondhand witnesses, who saw crashed flying saucer and or debris and or bodies, alien bodies, gray alien bodies, based on the descriptions. So yeah, these things obviously, and there's been more crashes than just Roswell over it. But see what happened. The reason Roswell's so well known is because at that time the government they didn't have a policy in place. They weren't organized to handle UFOs and recovering UFOs and covering it all up. So that's why some information got out, and that's why it was a little bit messy. After that, they learned from that incident, and so any crashes that happened after that, they had teams, specifically put together that handle these kind of things, that go in there, and then they knew what they were doing. I mean, you read the Majestic 12 documents, and we've talked about that a number of times in this podcast. You read the those documents, you see that they had a really decent policy in place. I mean, they had that special operations manual on how to retrieve, how to handle crashed extraterrestrial saucers and anything, and bodies, how to handle all that stuff. And I've talked about that in different podcasts as well. But the one thing I will say, though, it doesn't seem like these things do crash into aircraft. I mean, now there have been reports of these things shooting down aircraft. I mean, now according to the late Stanton Friedman, the nuclear physicist, and probably one of the most well-known ufologists who's ever lived. I miss this guy. I loved listening to him, on TV and in documentaries. He was the best. But he believed, like from information that he gathered, he said there were a lot of anecdotal reports that there were military craft in some cases, particularly during the 1950s, that went after these craft and tried to shoot them down, and the pilots and the craft and the fighters never returned. Somehow were they disintegrated? I mean, what happened? They were blown up. I mean, no, the government's not going to tell us that. That would cause a panic, of course. So they're not going to tell you that. But for the most part, these things seem pretty safe, right? I mean, let's be realistic here. Now, of course, people in airliners, pilots mostly a lot of times see these things, but actually people flying on airliners over the decades have seen flying saucers or other strange objects flying alongside commercial airliners. I mean, and we know for a fact now that the military fighter pilots are seeing these things flying around all the time, particularly out over the oceans. They're buzzing military bases. They're checking out nuclear weapons silos. I mean, they're around, but they don't usually crash into our aircraft. I mean, it's not something that happens. It just isn't. I mean, if over 75 years, if that were to happen, it's going to be pretty hard to cover that up. But what do I know? I just would imagine that it would be pretty difficult to cover something like that up. But let's look at this. These objects, a lot of people believe that, these, like, say, we'll take a flying saucer, for instance. Apparently it creates somehow generates its own little universe. And that's why they could travel at tremendous speeds inside, and not be affected by the force, that if humankind were to develop something that could travel, 15,000 miles per hour, we wouldn't be able to put a person in there, because they'd probably die, from the force. Or these saucers are able to fly at tremendous speeds and then stop on a dime. Of course, if somehow our jet fighters were flying at incredible speeds and then stopping on a dime, the pilots would be juice on the windshield. So that apparently these craft are, their safety precautions are beyond anything that we could dream of. I mean, so apparently these things don't crash that often. They have things figured out for the most part, except for the Mother Nature incidents somehow. They do fly ridiculously close, though, sometimes. I mean, it's possible, of course. Anything's possible, right? Someday, maybe one of these craft is going to crash into a plane that's flying around. I mean, and that's why I understand Burchett's concerns here. And and I agree with everything he says here, actually. I mean, I'm not saying what he's saying is wrong. I'm just saying the reality is these things don't really crash into flying objects. It's just not something that's happening all the time. But they do crash, but from what? probably Mother Nature, who knows, maybe into themselves. I don't know, but it doesn't seem like they're crashing into airplanes or helicopters on a daily basis. Now, there's been a lot of cases where they came very close to helicopters and planes and scared the hell out of the people inside the planes and helicopters, but they didn't actually crash. The object that I saw floated unbelievably close to treetops. I mean, unbelievably close. I mean, there's no human aircraft, and this was back in 1994, of course. There's no human aircraft that would ever dare fly as close to treetops as the thing that I saw, during this fishing trip I had back in 1994. Now, sometimes there are things that happen, strange things. Of course, we can look at the Val Johnson incident from 1979, and I'm going to just read a little bit of this from. A lot of you guys already heard this, but I'll just read this little brief mention of it that's listed in Wikipedia, and I'll leave the link here for that too. The Val Johnson incident refers to an alleged encounter by Marshall County, Minnesota Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson with a UFO in 1979. It states, Johnson reported that while he was on patrol near Warren, Minnesota, about 2 a.m. on August 27, 1979, he saw a beam of light just above the road. According to Johnson, the beam sped towards him. His squad car was engulfed in light, and he heard glass breaking. Johnson said he was unconscious for 39 minutes, and when he awoke, he realized his wristwatch and the vehicle's clock had stopped for 14 minutes. The windshield was shattered, a headlight and red emergency light was damaged, and a thin radio aerial bent. Deputies responding to Johnson's call for help found his squad car sideways on the road. Johnson suffered bruises and eye irritation that a physician compared to welder's burns. When the story received national publicity, Johnson told reporters the sudden attention had caused him and his family a great deal of emotional strain. And then has responses. Ufologists, including Alan Hendry and Jerome Clark, consider the incident significant, with Clark claiming that Johnson refused to take a polygraph test because Johnson believed it would only serve to satisfy people's morbid curiosity. UFO skeptic Philip Klass argued that the entire event was a hoax and that Johnson had deliberately damaged his own patrol car. See, that's what Philip Klass, he's the late Philip Klass. Back in the day, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, this guy was the top. He was one of the big debunkers out there. He was always showing up on TV, particularly later on, like on CNN in the 80s and 90s. He would have debates with ufologists. This guy was terrible person. The way he was like this in this case here, because there was no other excuse. He couldn't come up with anything. He goes, "Oh, it must have been a hoax then. It must have been a hoax then." That's all that's the kind of stuff this guy did. A lot of people believe that Klass might have actually been a government disinformation agent. That's what I think he was too, because I could never understand why somebody would take things that far as a UFO debunker and just try to make fools out of some people. Because the things with this Val Johnson incident, I mean, something hit his car and it was very strange. I mean, it stopped the clocks. The guy was conked out for 39 minutes. I mean, it's totally something happened. The guy wasn't lying. But what was it? I mean, was it a full-fledged flying saucer? I don't think it was. It could have been some sort of smaller type extraterrestrial probe of some sort. Who knows? That got out of control. But it does, as you can see, and that's one of the cases where actually, things hit a vehicle. Now, it wasn't a flying craft, of course, but these things could apparently will and sometimes hit a vehicle, and in that case, that's what happened. Now, continuing with this article from the Mirror. It says here, earlier this year, the United States Congress held its first hearing on UFOs in over half a century. One unexplained sighting was a video shot by military aircraft showing a UFO buzzing a U.S. Navy ship off the Californian coast in July 2019. The tic-tac-shaped object flew above the Pacific for a few minutes before seemingly vanishing beneath the ocean's surface. As it disappeared, military personnel could be heard saying, "It splashed." Defense chiefs said the footage was real and showed a mystery craft with technology that appeared up to 1,000 years ahead of anything known to the military. In June, NASA announced it is forming a team of space boffins to probe such unidentified aerial phenomena. Well, I'm not going to read the rest of it. You could check it out. I'll leave the link for that article too. But again, yeah, I think this is really good. I'm really glad to see that there are people in Congress taking the initiative to basically, try to, do something about this situation. Yeah. Again, I don't think it. I think Burchett's concerns. There is a concern. It could happen. He's right. It's only a matter of time. Right. At some point, I guess something could happen. But as far as I know, it hasn't happened. Not with any known not with any of our aircraft. They get close. They cause chaos, and But as far as we know, unless the government's holding back something, we don't really know for sure if anything's ever hit any of our aircraft and there was a collision. As far as I know, I just, I don't know of that. I mean, I believe that they crash on their own, whether it's due to Mother Nature or perhaps sometimes we're firing upon these things, and maybe sometimes over the decades we've gotten lucky and hit one or two or three. But I don't think that there's much danger. I would imagine, people always say, well, it's a lot safer flying than it is driving your car. Well, I would imagine it's a lot safer flying around in a flying saucer than in any kind of human manufactured aircraft.